Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to discuss my concern about the chaos that is roiling the Department of Defense. Sunday will mark the 100th day of Pete Hegseth serving as Secretary of Defense. During his confirmation hearing, Mr. Hegseth said, quote, President Trump wants a Pentagon laser-focused on warfighting, lethality, meritocracy, standards, and readiness. That's it. That's my job. Well, Mr. President, Secretary Hegseth is failing the mission President Trump gave him. His actions over the past 100 days have done nothing but distract the Pentagon and undermine its warfighting, lethality, meritocracy, standards, and readiness. In his first 100 days, Secretary Hegseth has terminated or weakened programs and processes that are the bedrock upon which the military recruits personnel and trains service members to go into battle. For example, in February, the Secretary announced his plan to slash the civilian workforce by 5 to 8%, terminate probationary workers, and institute a hiring freeze. These severe measures have only meant more work for the remaining employees and more costly work for military officers and contractors to cover the gaps or simply not to carry out the missions. The Secretary has also launched a number of efforts to eliminate diversity and inclusion programs, which have led to more limited recruiting efforts, plans for separating honorably serving transgender service members, dissolving social clubs at the military academies, banning and removing books from the Naval Academy, and inspiring walkouts by students at DoD schools abroad over book bans and curriculum changes. Frankly, I joined the Army in 1967 and served on active duty for 12 years. And the idea that dependent children of military personnel in a DoD school in Germany would protest the Secretary of Defense, to me, was inconceivable. But it's happened. Showing, I think, great anxiety in the ranks of our military personnel all across the globe. The Secretary is also failing his duty to lead the department by example. That's one of the key touchstones of any leadership. Do what I do. Follow me. For example, on March 24th, Mr. Hegseth demonstrated a severe lack of judgment when he texted classified military intelligence on the unclassified and unsecure Signal app to at least 2 group chats, including one with his wife, brother, and personal lawyer, which raises the question, why would they have access to or should have access to highly classified information? That information, if intercepted by an adversary, would endanger the lives of our servicemen deployed downrange. The Secretary also installed a dirty line, quote unquote, which is an unsecured internet connection into his Pentagon office so he could more easily send text and personal emails. Such actions violate the laws and protocols that every other military serviceman is required to follow. When they bring in enlisted personnel, junior officers, and tell them about the boundaries of proper cyber use, they make it very clear it is completely inappropriate, indeed dangerous, to plug a dirty line into an official computer. The Department of Defense Office of Inspector General is conducting an investigation of these activities. This mishandling, in the view of most people I know, particularly professional officers, of classified information. And we all look forward to his independent and unbiased findings. And just hours ago, we learned of press reports that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz will be fired this week because of his own actions around the signal incident. If true, I welcome the message of accountability that it sends. Mr. Waltz made a significant mistake in adding a reporter to a sensitive signal chat, and his failure of judgment could have had serious national security consequences. But I respect that he took responsibility for his mistake and paid the cost, apparently. In contrast, Secretary Hegseth has refused to take responsibility for his own misconduct, in which my view was far more egregious than that of Mr. Waltz. Indeed, the fallout from this incident has further eroded the already dismal credibility that the Secretary brought to the Pentagon. The Secretary's inner circle of hand-picked advisors have nearly all resigned or been fired. His chief of staff was dismissed amid allegations of incompetence and unsettling personal behavior. 3 of his senior policy advisors were fired for allegedly leaking sensitive information, which they all staunchly deny. And his top spokesman resigned after losing confidence in the Secretary and writing, and I'll quote, "The building is in disarray under Hegseth's leadership." And furthermore, quote, "The last month has been a full-blown meltdown at the Pentagon, and it's becoming a real problem for the administration." And this was the words of Secretary Hegseth's self-selected top spokesperson. This chain of events is extraordinary and underscores the concerns I raised at Secretary Hegseth's nomination hearing. He does not possess the temperament and management skills needed to lead the Pentagon, and he's proving that over and over. There have been multiple news reports that Secretary Hegseth spends much of his day focused on perceived leaks and that he has become paranoid, lashing out at aides and senior military leaders, convinced that they are undermining him. He has threatened his top military advisors, including then-acting Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Grady, and Joint Chiefs Director General Sims, with polygraph tests in order to prove that these distinguished military leaders are not liars. Knowing the quality and the dedication of these gentlemen to the military, and particularly to their obligation for honesty and fidelity, I find it unusual that they would be receiving the lie detector test. In fact, it might be interesting if the Secretary took a lie detector test. The Secretary's office should be leading the Pentagon, allowing the rest of the department to be laser-focused on their missions. But again, President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made that very difficult due to the internal disarray they have created by firing key military leaders. These firings include the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Chief of Naval Operations, the Commander of Cyber Command, the U.S. military representative to NATO, the Vice Chair of the Air Force, the Secretary of Defense senior military aide, and the top uniformed lawyers, the Judge Advocate Generals of each of the military services. You know, one of the thoughts I had is if you want to go ahead and do things that are beyond the law, the first thing you do is get rid of the lawyers. And that's the first thing he did. And these are not minor positions. They are vital to the department's mission. And when left unfilled, the military loses focus and missions are compromised. These officers were fired without a plan to replace them, which is crippling our military's effectiveness during a perilous time. More importantly, these officers were fired without explanation, which leads to the worst possible outcome for military force. Fear throughout the ranks that one should not speak up, should not refuse an illegal order, and should not call out abuse or question decisions. General and flag officers are charged with providing their unbiased, quote, best military advice to the civilian leaders of the Department of Defense. Service members, all the way down to young NCOs and enlisted personnel, are expected to give candid feedback to their leaders and peers. And commanders expect troops to give them the facts, straight and true, and their best advice, because lives are on the line. In fact, any good officer understands that his success and the success and indeed the lives of his troops are based so much on the advice, the insights of non-commissioned officers in his command. And if that spirit, that aspect of military life in which people can talk the truth to each other is frustrated or essentially annulled, we are in a grave position. Now, similarly, Congress expects candor from senior officers to provide their best judgment without fear of retribution for both the security of our country and that of the 2 million servicemen and women who put themselves in harm's way. But firing officers as a political litmus test poisons this military ethos. It sends an immediate signal to troops that providing their unbiased best military advice might have career-ending consequences. Now, I'll take a brief moment to discuss the officers who have been dismissed. General C.Q. Brown served as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and was fired without explanation, not even halfway into his 4-year term. The first chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to be dismissed during his term of office. And this stretches back many decades. The office of Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was designed by Congress to be such that it bridged elections, that it was not tied into elections, that it was far from elections. But one of the first steps that Trump and Hegseth said is to break this custom, this tradition, really this value. When he was informed, he was visiting our troops on the southern border, and he was abruptly dismissed, even without the courtesy of a call by the President or the Secretary of Defense to say, "I'm sorry, but you're leaving." General Brown served our nation honorably for more than 4 decades. He was a fighter pilot with multiple combat missions, and he led the Joint Staff with dedication and skill. By the way, the Senate approved his nomination by a vote of 83 to 11. Not exactly a vote for a controversial personality. To date, the Trump administration has given no justification for his dismissal. 7 full weeks passed without a confirmed chairman of the Joint Chiefs. General Dan Crane has now been confirmed and is working hard to get up to speed. Given what happened to his predecessor, General Crane must realize that in his additions to his duties as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he must also deal with the political intrigue consuming the Pentagon. I hope that General Crane will always provide the best military advice to the President and the Secretary of Defense, even if that advice is not what they would want to hear. Secretary Hegseth also dismissed Admiral Lisa Franchetti, who served as the 33rd Chief of Naval Operations. She was the first woman to lead the Navy and the first to serve on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Admiral Franchetti served in leadership roles at every level throughout the Navy, both ashore and at sea, and with postings around the globe. She was a trailblazer, team builder, and inspiration to many. The Senate approved her nomination by a vote of 95 to 1. A strong endorsement from this body based on her record and her service. Again, the Trump administration has given no justification for her dismissal. To date, the administration has not nominated a new Chief of Naval Operations. It has been 2 months since Admiral Franchetti was dismissed, and the Navy remains without a Senate-confirmed Chief of Naval Operations at a time when the service is involved in the most intensive combat operations since World War II, taking place today in the Red Sea. I was able to greet a destroyer returning from the Red Sea and was informed that it's seen more action than any destroyer since World War II. General Timothy Hawke served as the commander of U.S. Cyber Command and the director of the National Security Agency. As the commander of Cyber Command, General Hawke led the most formidable cyber warfighting force in the world, responsible for detecting, deterring, and overseeing cyber operations against America's adversaries, particularly China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and various terrorist organizations. General Hawke had a distinguished 34-year career with the Air Force cyber and intelligence organizations, including multiple command assignments. Indeed, I was impressed with not only his technical skill, but his professionalism, his commitment to serving the nation, protecting the Constitution, and doing it with the skill which is remarkable. I am extremely concerned that press reports indicate that Laura Loomer, a fringe conspiracy theorist, convinced President Trump to dismiss General Hawke and fire a slew of expert staff at the National Security Council for no discernible reason. Now, when a radio personality can get into the president's office and convince him to fire an officer of General Hawke's demonstrated capacity and others on the National Security Council, there's not only something wrong with that radio personality, there's something wrong with the president who would listen to that without consulting others. By the way, the Senate unanimously confirmed General Hawke to his post in December 2023, and once again, the Trump administration has given no explanation for his dismissal. The Trump administration has not selected a new cybercom commander, and it's unclear if there's any sense of urgency to fill this position. Secretary Hegseth has given a priceless gift to China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea by purging from our leadership one of our most vital national security commanders. Vice Admiral Shoshana Chatfield served as the United States military representative to NATO. She held a vital leadership role within the alliance, particularly as it related to coordinating international support to Ukraine. Admiral Chatfield was among the finest military officers our nation had to offer, with a 38-year career as a Navy helicopter pilot, foreign policy expert, and preeminent military educator, including as president of the Naval War College. The Senate unanimously confirmed Vice Admiral Chatfield to her post in December 2023. Again, the Trump administration has given no justification for her dismissal and has not nominated any replacement to this critical posting at NATO. General James Slife was the U.S. Air Force Vice Chief of Staff, the second highest ranking officer in the Air Force. He spent most of his 36-year career as a special operations helicopter pilot, a daunting and dangerous pursuit. He deployed many times around the world and flew countless combat missions in perilous conditions. General Slife risked his life repeatedly for our nation and led his fellow special operators and airmen with distinction. Again, the Senate unanimously confirmed General Slife to his post in December 2023. The Trump administration has given no explanation for its dismissal, nor have they nominated any office to help lead the Air Force. Lieutenant General Jennifer Short was the first female senior military assistant to the Secretary of Defense. She advised the Secretary and served as a representative for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, coordinating policy and operations across the Joint Staff, combatant commands, and with the U.S. interagency. A command pilot with more than 1,800 flight hours, including more than 430 combat hours in an A-10. She flew in operations Southern Watch, Iraqi Freedom, and Enduring Freedom, and commanded airmen at the squadron, wing, major command, and combatant command levels. The Senate unanimously confirmed her to her post. The Trump administration has given no explanation for his dismissal. Finally, I'm deeply concerned by Secretary Hegseth's dismissal of the Judge Advocates General of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. These officers, known as TJAGs, are the most senior uniformed officers in the military. These officers served more than 30 years in uniform as military lawyers. They were strictly apolitical and held fundamental roles ensuring that balance, lawful counsel was part of every military policy discussion. These officers provided legal oversight that spanned military justice, operational law, administrative compliance, government ethics, and the United States adherence to the law of armed conflict. These unprecedented firings, along with the firings of the Inspector General, should alarm everyone about the commitment of the President and the Secretary of Defense to follow the rule of law for the military, and also within the United States and across the world. Mr. President, the Defense Department is one of the most complex institutions in the world, with a budget of nearly $900 billion and a workforce of nearly 3 million military and civilian personnel. It is an organization that requires strong leadership, stability, predictability, and trust. These qualities are critical because we ask the department's men and women to risk their lives every day in the service of this country. Mr. President, those men and women who gave their lives and all of those who are still serving at this moment deserve the best. They deserve a leader who is truly laser-focused on readiness, lethality, and the missions, not someone who treats his position as secretary as a performance exercise, complete with a Twitter feed dominated with workout videos. Our service members deserve better. They deserve someone who is focused on them, not focused on himself. If Secretary Hegseth does not improve his job performance, the conditions at the Pentagon will continue to deteriorate, and something worse is bound to happen. I hope Secretary Hegseth takes note. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. President, I have 5 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today to talk about how my Democratic colleagues, some rhinos, and the globalist media are working together to try to take down Donald Trump and derail his America's First agenda. The latest target, President Trump's Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. I've said many times that I'm convinced that many Democrats would rather see America and its leaders fail than to see this country succeed. It's sad, but it's true. You know, when President Trump nominated Pete Hegseth to serve as Secretary of Defense, he intentionally picked someone who understands what it means to fight for this country, not from behind a desk, but from the front lines. Pete didn't inherit stars on his uniform. He earned his stripes while serving in the Middle East. He's one of the few in Washington who's been in the fight and experienced the traumas of war. He knows firsthand what the warfighter goes through each and every day, which is why military recruiting has skyrocketed under his leadership. I don't know why, I don't know about you, but as the dad of 2 sons, I am glad that the man leading our Department of Defense knows the dangers of war firsthand. You know, for decades, this country has gotten involved in foreign wars that we've had no business being involved in. Thousands of Americans have lost their lives. Trillions of dollars have been squandered fighting wars where no clear objectives past the victory has ever been provided to the American citizen. We just fight them. You would think that we would learn from at least 1 or 2 of these painful lessons. But no, that hasn't stopped the globalist warmonger machine in Washington, D.C. They love war because it funds paychecks. You know, for this reason, Democrats, the swamp, and some rhinos banded together to oppose Pete Hegseth immediately after he was nominated by President Trump. Didn't take them long. I'm convinced that their opposition to Hegseth was only because he was not part of the military-industrial complex. As a member of the Armed Services Committee, I came to the Senate floor to urge my colleagues to support Pete Hegseth's nomination because of his outsider, not Washington, D.C., but outsider status. Thankfully, he was confirmed. But unfortunately, the smears, of some of which have come from my colleagues, have only gotten worse since Hegseth was confirmed. You know, globalists in the media, some Republicans are working overtime to try to get Pete Hegseth. The media is breathlessly rushing to put a microphone in front of every single disgruntled former Pentagon employee who has been fired by this secretary. You know, it doesn't matter what they're fired for. All that matters to the media and the rhinos is that they have something to say bad about the Secretary of Defense. It's clear, as day in, day out, that these efforts to embarrass Hegseth are nothing more than desperate attempts to salvage reputations and distract from the successes he is already having in the Pentagon. The truth is, Hegseth inherited a complete, absolute mess at the DOD. The Pentagon has failed an audit 7 years in a row. You know, if a business did that, they'd go under. But in our government, that's just par for the course. And thanks to the Biden administration's horrible withdrawal from Afghanistan, countries who hate us like China, Iran, and Venezuela have been emboldened. And instead of working to deter World War III, however, Joe Biden's Pentagon was more focused on social justice. In 2024, the Biden Defense Department requested more than $114 million for DEI initiatives, $114 million. Meanwhile, recruitment was an historic low and falling. Military readiness was slipping, and the world saw a weakened United States. Pete Hegseth made it clear that he's here to reverse course and that changes that he's made are already visible to the positive. Secretary Hegseth has already eliminated more than 200 diversity and inclusion positions and cut more than $580 million in wasteful grants and contracts. $580 million. Secretary Hegseth has made it clear that he is focused on warfighting, readiness, mission focus, not political correctness or appeasing the woke mob. He's restored merit-based promotions, refocused leadership training on battlefield effectiveness, terminated taxpayer-funded abortions for military personnel, and reinstalled discipline as a cornerstone of the United States of America military. This isn't just talk either. The Department is actively removing woke DEI materials from service academies and replacing them with warfighting-centric curricula. He also cut through bloated procurement delays and brought transparency to the defense budget. What a novel concept is actually knowing what your budget is. You know, just 4 months in, DOD has achieved 100% operational control of the border. This was after the Biden administration said for 4 years that, hey, there's nothing that they could do to secure the border. Well, what a joke. Under Secretary Hegseth's leadership, the department has moved to reduce acquisition timelines, fast-track critical update systems, and is making sure the U.S. is ready to compete and win wars in the 21st century. And construction on the historic Golden Dome, by the way, is well underway. But it's not just about equipment. Pete has doubled down on his support for the warfighter by improving access to mental health services, other resources that boost morale and readiness. It was much needed. He reinstated the service members who were wrongfully removed over their personal decisions to not take the COVID-19 vaccine. Many of them. He's reinstated quite a few. The fact that President Biden and Secretary Austin dismissed these service members was absolutely dead wrong. And I'm glad that President Trump's administration has taken quick action to right this wrong. You know, when I met with Pete during his confirmation process, I told him plainly, don't go to Washington to make friends, but to go there and fight for the warfighter. So far, he's kept his promise. I can't speak for everyone, but I know the folks I've talked to back in my state of Alabama are very appreciative. We need a Secretary of Defense who's focused on one thing, and one thing only, defending America. And that's what Pete Hegseth is doing. And he will tell you this, there is no second place in war. We have to be ready at all times. You know, under the Biden administration, 13 American troops lost their lives because of poor planning in Afghanistan. We all know that. We've seen it. We saw it pretty much live. Under President Trump and Hegseth, we have executed successful strikes against terrorist Houthis that have resulted in critical shipping lanes being reopened. We have to get our shipping lanes open because it is costing this country millions and millions of dollars, and world leaders across the country are begging for this to happen. Pete Hegseth didn't sign up to be liked by the D.C. cocktail circuit. You know, he committed to making a military great again, and that's exactly what he's doing. You know, the swamp doesn't like people it can't control, but America loves its leaders who tell the truth and fight for what matters. Pete Hegseth is one of those leaders, so let's be clear, Pete is not the problem. A lot of the media think Pete Hegseth's a problem. He's not the problem. He's the solution to the problem we've had. And while the swamp keeps losing its ever-loving mind because we have leaders who are actually putting America's first, again, Secretary Hegseth will keep marching forward, focused on the only thing that matters, making our military the strongest, fiercest, and most respected fighting force in the world. I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Senator from Oregon is
I
recognized.
ask unanimous consent that Milan Watson of my team be granted floor privileges for the remainder of the Congress.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise to urge my colleagues to reject Frank Bisignano's nomination to be the Commissioner of the Social Security Administration. The first 100 days of Donald Trump's second term have been filled with chaos and cruelty that has reached into every corner of American life. But perhaps no development has been as alarming to the elderly and other concerned Americans as the attacks of the Trump administration on Social Security. Social Security has long been considered a third rail of American politics. It is simply too important to American workers who spent their lives paying into the program out of every paycheck for politicians to idly propose major changes that would harm the earned benefits of Americans. And yet Donald Trump and his billionaire allies have decided they are simply immune to the concerns of American citizens. They're about to find out just how wrong they are. Over the past several months, the Trump administration has attacked nearly every aspect of Social Security. First, it was American sensitive private information protected by Social Security. Then it was scheduling field offices for closure across the country. Then it was eliminating phone service for many Social Security claims. Worst of all, there is a widespread view among Donald Trump's top lieutenants, from Elon Musk to Howard Lutnick, that Social Security is just chock full of fraudsters. The whiplash caused day by day and all the disruption and chaos has resulted in bedlam at Social Security. And in my view, it has put the earned benefits of millions of Americans in jeopardy. Mr. President, I wish I could stand in the Senate today and say, the cavalry is coming. The chaos will soon be over. But I'm afraid that's not the case. If Frank Bisignano is confirmed, he's going to bring more chaos, lies, and callous disregard for Americans who count on Social Security that the Trump administration has brought to the agency through DOGE. That was front and center when the nominee came before the Finance Committee in March. Just before the hearing, Mr. President, I received a very valuable statement from a whistleblower, a former senior official at Social Security. The whistleblower stated that Mr. Bisignano had been deeply involved in the DOGE chaos at Social Security. The whistleblower said, and I quote, "I'm concerned that the President's nominee to be Commissioner of Social Security, Frank Bisignano, will not temper the crisis, but will bolster it." The allegations presented by the whistleblower center around Elon Musk's DOGE and their attempts to access Social Security databases that hold reams of sensitive personal information of every single American. These databases, Mr. President, represent the Fort Knox of Americans' personal lives. Bank account numbers, home addresses, work histories, salaries, medical records. DOGE's cronies wanted unfettered access to the database. They're still fighting for that as we speak after they've been blocked in court. According to the whistleblower, Mr. Bisignano personally appointed his Wall Street friend, Michael Russo, to be the leader of the DOGE team at Social Security. According to the Washington Post, which independently verified, Mr. President, the whistleblower's account, and I'll quote here, after Russo had trouble persuading the career staff to expedite the hiring of a DOGE software engineer named Akash Boba, Mr. Bisignano personally intervened to instruct Social Security staff to onboard Mr. Boba and give him immediate access to the agency's private data systems. Bisignano did not address what role he may have had in helping Mr. Boba gain access. Boba and Russo did not respond to requests for comment. That's a direct quote from the Washington Post newspaper. My view is this is a remarkable statement, Mr. President, that ought to alarm all Americans. I asked Mr. Bisignano about his affiliations with DOJ before, during, and after his hearing. Each time he disavowed the whistleblower's challenge. I viewed that moment as an opportunity for Democrats and Republicans to come together, as we've done so often, on a bipartisan basis and get to the bottom of this before the Finance Committee reported the nominee to the full Senate. Unfortunately, my Republican colleagues didn't see it that way. I started by asking the chairman of the Finance Committee for a bipartisan meeting with this whistleblower to evaluate their claims and seek additional evidence to determine if the nominee lied to members of the committee. The majority refused to hold that meeting or postpone the vote unless we agreed to hand over any information received from the whistleblower directly to the nominee in the Trump administration. Mr. President, I just want to be clear on this point. This is a violation of Whistleblowing 101. That's because it allows the government to identify the individual blowing the whistle through a process of elimination. It jeopardizes the whistleblower's anonymity and safety, and I'm going to have no part of that as the co-chair of the Whistleblower Caucus with my friend Senator Grassley. There's a long bipartisan tradition in the Senate of treating whistleblowers with great respect and deep care. I'm here to warn America now about a dangerous erosion of congressional oversight that will have a chilling effect on public servants who are thinking about coming forward and blowing the whistle when government agencies are acting against the interests of the Americans they serve. Mr. President, I fear that the events that I have just described are going to cause public servants who want to do the right thing to put away their whistles. That is bad for good government. It's bad for congressional oversight of laws we delegated to the executive branch through our constitutional authority, and it is bad for Americans who expect their government to be responsive and transparent. The double whammy of disrespect for Social Security and the Americans who count on its earned benefits, along with the culture of secrecy and lies that exist throughout the Trump administration, is a bad omen for what's ahead for Social Security. Even if the Republican Party decides to pretend none of this is happening, Americans from Portland, Oregon to Portland, Maine, all of them are speaking out literally this weekend. All Americans should be concerned that a nominee for a position of public trust like Commissioner of Social Security is accused of lying about his actions at the agency, and that effort to bring this important information to light is now being thwarted. If Mr. Bisignano can get away with lying before he's even in place as commissioner, who knows what else he'll be able to get away with once he's in office. He could lie by denying any American who paid their Social Security taxes the benefits they've earned, claiming some phony pretense. He could lie about how sensitive personal information is being mishandled or worse, exploited for commercial use. I'll close with this, Mr. President. I'm going to have a lot more to say about the nominee and the Trump administration's disastrous record on Social Security. Today, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the cloture vote coming up to bring some sanity back to Social Security and, in my view, safeguard the Senate's long and bipartisan tradition as a safe haven for government whistleblowers who want to speak truth to power. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
I recognize the senator from Idaho.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to urge my colleagues to vote in, to vote in favor of the confirmation of Mr. Frank Bisignano, who is nominated to be the Commissioner of the Social Security Administration. The Social Security Administration has the significant responsibility of overseeing the Social Security program, which provides monthly benefits to millions of seniors, individuals with disabilities, and their families. The Social Security Administration also oversees the Supplemental Security Income Program and issues Social Security numbers and cards, among other critical workloads. I'm confident that Mr. Bisignano has the experience needed to lead this important agency. He has more than 30 years of executive leadership experience in banks and financial institutions. He currently serves as the chairman of the board and the chief executive officer of Fiserv, Inc., a leader in payments and financial technology. During his nomination hearing, Mr. Bisignano committed to improving customer service at the Social Security Administration, including by bringing down wait times for the agency's National 800 number and for claims decisions, ensuring that individuals can interact with the Social Security Administration in the way they prefer, whether in person, by phone, or online, and improving the Social Security Administration's payment accuracy. During Mr. Bisignano's nomination hearing, concerns were raised regarding his alleged connections to Doge's work at the Social Security Administration. These allegations were raised in an anonymous letter dated March 24, 2025, the day before the nomination hearing. The allegations focused on the frequency and details of communications between the nominee and Social Security Administration officials. Mr. Bisignano addressed these allegations during the hearing and responded in writing as part of the questions for the record. He has stated clearly that he does not currently have a role at the Social Security Administration and was not part of the decision-making process led by the acting Commissioner Lee Dudek about Social Security operations, personnel, or management. The Social Security Administration needs steady, Senate-confirmed leadership. Mr. Bisignano would bring decades-long focus on customer service and operational excellence to the Social Security Administration. I strongly encourage my colleagues to join me in voting to confirm Mr. Bisignano to serve as the next Commissioner of Social Security.
Mr. President,
I recognize.
just to respond to my colleague who I've worked together with so often in such a positive way, that this is an area where we just have a very significant difference of opinion. The whistleblower is a senior official who has worked for years at Social Security. I believe the information given was credible, documented now by a Washington Post reporter who surveyed some of the resources, the individuals who could confirm it. And what I wanted to do, because I've worked with my colleagues so often, is to have a bipartisan process to resolve the matter. And what the majority said was, if we were going to have a bipartisan process, we'd take the information that the whistleblower gave and we'd give it to the administration and anybody else, and it would breach the essence of whistleblowing 101, what we have worked on for so long. So I want it understood that I still wish that we were doing this in a bipartisan way, as I've done for so long as the co-chair of the Whistleblower Caucus. That would resolve it, and it would be done with the tradition of protecting whistleblowers, as we've done so often over the years, and especially in the Finance Committee. What I think is unfortunate is this is breaking the tradition that the Finance Committee has always done in terms of protecting whistleblowers, doing it in a fair way, and working together. I think we'll regret it. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
I recognize the senator from Idaho.
Briefly to respond, we worked very closely with our colleagues across the aisle to try to vet this anonymous letter and to get the information necessary to evaluate it. We are still willing to look at it. But at this point, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to the Bisignano nomination.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent that the roll call vote begin immediately.
Without objection. The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Frank Bisignano of New Jersey to be Commissioner of Social Security Administration, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of Frank Bisignano of New Jersey to be the Commissioner of the Social Security for the term expiring January 19, 2031 shall be brought to a close. The nays and yeas are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd,